In the final decades of the 19th century, Africa stood at a crossroads. European powers arrived not as guests, but as conquerors, armed with treaties written in bad faith and weapons designed for domination. Across the continent, kingdoms were pressured to submit, adapt, or disappear. In West Africa, one king rejected all three options. His name was Behanzin, ruler of the kingdom of Dahomey, and he would become one of the fiercest symbols of African resistance to European imperialism. Behanzin ascended the throne in 1889, inheriting a kingdom already under intense pressure from France. The French had secured coastal territories and were steadily pushing inland, determined to control trade routes, resources, and political authority. Dahomey stood directly in their path. But Dahomey was not a weak or disorganized state. For generations, it had maintained a centralized monarchy, strict administrative systems, and one of the most disciplined militaries in Africa. At the heart of that military stood the Agoje elite women soldiers trained from youth in combat, endurance, and absolute loyalty to the state. They were not symbolic figures. They were frontline warriors. Behanzin understood the reality of French intentions early. While other rulers attempted compromise or partial submission, he recognized that colonialism was not a negotiation, it was erasure. To submit was to surrender sovereignty, culture, and history itself. So Behanzin prepared for war. He rejected European customs and clothing, intentionally reinforcing Dahomeyan identity. His royal emblem, the shark, symbolized strength, vigilance, and dominance in hostile waters. His message was clear. Dahomey would not be swallowed. In 1890, war broke out. Dahomeyan forces launched bold attacks against French positions, relying on speed, knowledge of terrain, and psychological shock. The Agoji charged fortified lines with fearlessness that stunned European officers. French military records later described their astonishment at facing women who advanced under gunfire without hesitation. For a time, resistance held, but France returned with overwhelming force, machine guns, artillery, and reinforcements. The Second Franco-Dahomeyan War in 1892 was brutal and relentless. Villages were destroyed. Supply lines were cut. The battlefield became a war of attrition Dahomey could not win. Still, Behanzin refused to surrender. As French troops closed in on the capital, Abomey Behanzin made a decision that would define his legacy forever. Rather than allow the French to occupy his palace and parade his kingdom as conquered, he ordered the burning of Abomey. It was an act of defiance. If Dahomey was to fall, it would not fall as a trophy. Shortly afterward, Behanzin was captured and exiled first to Martinique, then to Algeria. Stripped of his kingdom, but not his dignity, he refused to recognize French authority or legitimize colonial rule. Even in exile, he carried himself as a king. Behanzin died in 1906, far from his homeland. France declared victory. Maps were redrawn. Colonial administration replaced Dahomeyan rule. But history did not end there. Today, Behanzin is remembered not as a defeated ruler, but as a man who understood that resistance has value even when victory is impossible. His refusal to submit preserved identity, inspired future generations, and exposed the violence behind colonial expansion. Colonial narratives once labeled him stubborn, primitive, and irrational. Modern history tells a different story. Behanzin was strategic. Behanzin was principled. Behanzin was conscious of what was at stake. His story reminds us that Africa did not fall because it lacked leadership or courage. It fell because it faced an industrial war machine bent on domination. And even then, it resisted. The legacy of Behanzin is not found in borders or treaties, but in memory, the memory of a king who chose dignity over survival, resistance over comfort, and identity over silence.